এনিওয়েজ আজকে আমরা যেটা আলোচনা করতে চলেছি সেটা হচ্ছে যে আরবানাইজেশন প্রসেস। ওকে, আরবানাইজেশন প্রসেস। আরবানাইজেশন বলতে যেটা মূলত আমরা বুঝি সেটা হচ্ছে যে এক সেকেন্ড, ইয়া, আরবানাইজেশন বলতে আমরা যেটা বুঝি সেটা হচ্ছে যে হাউ city is formed, how a city is developed. That is what we know as urbanization. এখন মুশকিলটা হচ্ছে যে this entire process of urbanization is a bit different from how sociologists understand it, how anthropologists understand it. So we will be focusing mostly on the anthropological understanding of urbanization. So urbanization is a study by which people or scholars try to understand how a city is formed out of a settlement. So a city can be formed out of different ways. For example, a city can develop from a village itself, or a city can be formed simply because of the migration of the population. So the rural folk can go to a city to go and gather to a certain place and become and make it a city. So there are different ways by which urban centers are formed, and based on which we have different divisions. For example, scholars like Redfield and Milton Singer, Robert Redfield and Milton Singer, they have argued that there are two major ways of urbanization. One is orthogenetic, another one is heterogenetic. In our syllabus, we have something called primary urbanization and secondary urbanization. For example, in sociological literature, you will find that there are pre-industrial urbanization and post-industrial urbanization. So these are different categories of urbanizations, and they are quite different from each other. So in order to understand how they differ and what we mean when we say that this is an urbanization process, we really need to look at certain core aspects, and first of which in anthropology is the concept of folk urban continuum. Folk urban continuum is a concept which was developed by Robert Redfield himself. So folk urban continuum basically says that as you encounter a village and then you go towards a city, can you really find out a place where the city ends and the village begins? You cannot. এটা পাওয়া যায় না. In reality, you cannot really find out a very clear boundary of a city. It's not possible, right? So when we go from village towards the city, you find that there are overlapping regions. এখন এই যে overlapping regions, this overlap was largely ignored by scholars before Redfield. Scholars before Redfield was of the opinion that the city and the village are quite different. While cities are self-sufficient, villages are also self-sufficient, and there is hardly any connection between the two, let alone the concept of overlapping areas. এখন এইটা যখন নাকি বলা হতে শুরু, এটা দীর্ঘদিন ধরে অ্যানথ্রোপোলজিস্টদের আইডিয়া ছিল, primarily because of the methodology of study, which is the localized form of ethnography. একটা লোকাল এরিয়াতে গিয়ে আমি ethnography করছি, so therefore it is very clear that we will be trying to see as a world in itself. একটা গ্রামকেই আমি একটা প্রায় একটা গোটা পৃথিবীর মতো করে ভাবার চেষ্টা করব, so that I can completely conclude something. And these are something to do with for example কি বলে ওটাকে functionalism, for example, because functionalistic approach which dominated social anthropology for so many years, they were also of the opinion that a village or a locality is a functional whole, a society is a functional whole, and they were not really interested to understand what sort of changes are there in the city. সো এইরকম ভাবে যেহেতু দেখা হতো, so therefore Redfield's idea of folk urban continuum was something new, and he developed this concept around 1940s. How did he develop this concept? He illustrated this idea from his study of Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. So there is a place called Yucatan in Mexico where he found out that there is at one end of the continuum, it's a continuum, right? There is no break from city to village. So at one end of the continuum, there is a very modern city of Merida, and there is on the other hand where you find out all a very remote village. But between the remote village and the modern city of Merida, he also found out another intermediate phase between the two extremes. If city or urban life is one pole, then there is another pole of the village. Then between the two poles, there is an intermediary space. That is what in Redfield's example was a town of Changcom. So Changcom is a town between Merida and a village. I am forgetting the name of the village. I will find out and tell you the name of the village. So this was a very interesting kind of a finding by Redfield, where he argued that that technology, social organization, and the worldview, if you see, worldview is a very cultural way of perceiving the world around you and how you do and how you interact with that world. So there are differences between the technology, social organization, and worldview between the two poles, but there are also similarities. এখন মজাটা হচ্ছে যে এইটা, this was a very interesting finding by Redfield, where he argued that there is no concrete clear cut boundary between city and village. City and village are always connected. So therefore, even if there are boundaries, the boundaries are porous. Boundary গুলো porous, ফুটো ফুটো আছে। এর কালচারাল এলিমেন্ট ওর ওখানে যায়, ওর কালচারাল এলিমেন্ট এর এখানে আসে। এখন এই যে কনসেপ্টটা রেডফিল্ড বললেন, এই কনসেপ্টটা নিয়ে যতদিন কাজকর্ম হতে লাগলো, পরবর্তীকালে যে কাজকর্মগুলো হতে লাগলো, সেইগুলো হচ্ছে যে টু ফাইন্ড আউট in what ways the cultural element from the rural areas are transformed to the cultural elements of the urban areas. এইটা হয়ে গেল এর পরের মূল উদ্দেশ্য, ঠিক আছে? So the main aim was to find out how the cultural elements are transforming from one end, from one pole to the other, right? এখন এই ওয়ান পোল টু দ্য আদার কালচারাল এলিমেন্টটা কিভাবে ট্রান্সফর্ম হয় সেটা নিয়ে বিশ্বের বহু দেশে গবেষণা হতে শুরু করে। রেডফিল্ড নিজেও কাজ করেন। রেডফিল্ড নিজে, তার আরেকজন সহকারী, অ্যানাদার কো-ওয়ার্কার মিল্টন সিঙ্গার, এই দুজনে মিলে ইন্ডিয়াতেও বেশ কিছু কাজকর্ম করেন। So what they argued is that there are two kinds of traditions. There are two kinds of traditions to be found in the cities. One is, sorry, not in the city, in the society. One is called a great tradition, another one is called the little tradition. What is a great tradition? Great tradition is the most powerful tradition of the nearest city. কাছাকাছি শহরের যে সবচেয়ে বেশি ডমিনেটিং কালচারাল ট্রেন্ড বা কালচারাল ট্রেট, তার যদি একটা কমপ্লেক্স আমি ভাবার চেষ্টা করি, সেটা যেটা ফর্ম করবে, দ্যাট ইজ কল্ড দ্য গ্রেট ট্রেডিশন. But this great tradition is also linked with the country places যে little tradition গুলো থাকে, and these two are always interacting with each other. So great tradition will come to the little tradition, to the local areas, and the little tradition will go to the great tradition. So great tradition will keep on incorporating the little traditional features. এই সব গ্রামের বিভিন্ন ফিচার গুলোকেও সে ইনকর্পোরেট করে নেবে নিজের এই গ্রেট ট্র্যাডিশনটার মধ্যে, অলদো ইট উইল কিপ দ্য স্ট্রাকচার ইনট্যাক্ট, গঠনটা একই থাকবে, তার ভেতরে সে ধীরে ধীরে বিভিন্ন গ্রামীণ সংস্কৃতির বিষয়গুলোকে ঢুকিয়ে নিতে শুরু করবে। আবার লিটল ট্র্যাডিশনও কিন্তু শহরের বা নাগরিক যে বড় বড় ট্র্যাডিশন, যে পাওয়ারফুল ট্র্যাডিশন, সেগুলোর এলিমেন্ট গুলো দ্বারা প্রভাবিত হতে থাকবে। এই প্রভাবিত হওয়ার যে পদ্ধতি, সেটা নিয়েও রিসার্চ হয়েছে এবং সেই দুটোকে বলা হয় ইউনিভার্সালাইজেশন অ্যান্ড প্যারোকিয়ালাইজেশন। What is an universalization? Universalization is when a little traditional element is integrated into the great tradition. What is a parochialization? Parochialization is a condition when a great traditional element is integrated into the little tradition. ঠিক আছে, এইরকম ভাবে they tried to conceptualize how the city and the rural areas interact with each other to form a continuum. বোঝাতে পারলাম আমি? এখন এইটা দিয়ে আরবানাইজেশনকে ব্যাখ্যা করার জন্য রেডফিল্ড and মিল্টন সিঙ্গার have divided the city types into two different kinds. One is the orthogenetic city, another one is the heterogenetic city. What is an orthogenetic city? Orthogenetic city is a city where the great tradition will incorporate the little tradition, but the city itself will remain more or less same. এর উদাহরণ হচ্ছে বেনারস, for example. In India, Varanasi is the example of a great tradition city. It's a traditional city, and it remained a city by incorporating the little traditional elements for thousands of years. বহু বছরের পুরনো সিটি, বলা হয় one of the oldest continually inhabited city of the world is Benares. হ্যাঁ, শয়ে শয়ে বছর ধরে তারা great traditionটা ধরে রেখেছে by incorporating the little traditional elements through different ways. For example, one way is known as universalization, right? এখন এইভাবে যে শহরগুলো রয়েছে, these are all orthogenetic city. বোঝা গেল? আরেকটা উদাহরণ হচ্ছে চায়নার পেকিং. পেকিং is a very traditional kind of a city where it seems that nothing has changed. তোরা পেকিং ম্যানের নাম তো পড়েইছিস, so Peking is a known city to you, right? Now these orthogenetic cities are basically pre-industrial cities. I have argued that they are different kinds of city. Orthogenetic city, আমি তো প্রথমেই বলে দিলাম, there are different ways by which you can classify cities. So traditional orthogenetic cities are obviously pre-industrial city. ব্যাপারটা খুব বুঝতেই পারছিস, পরিষ্কার pre-industrial cities. So here the process of urbanization হচ্ছে by incorporating little tradition into the great tradition. So this is also a primary form of urbanization. তোদের সিলেবাসে দেওয়া রয়েছে primary urbanization and secondary urbanization. So the formation of orthogenetic city is a primary form of urbanization. বোঝাতে পারছি? And this is also a pre-industrial kind of urbanization. Are you getting my point? So this is also a pre-industrial kind of urbanization. The heterogenetic cities are the cities where people from different cultural origins have migrated and settled down. People from different cultural origins have migrated and settled down. It's very clear that these are the cities which developed after orthogenetic cities, তাই না? এগুলো orthogenetic cities থেকে পরবর্তীকালে ডেভেলপ করেছে, because here people have migrated for a particular purpose. কোনো নির্দিষ্ট পারপাস করার জন্য they have migrated. So they might have migrated because of business, they might have migrated because of administrative centers, because the cities were the administrative centers, for example New Delhi, right? Notun Delhi is basically an administrative center, so people have migrated for a variety of administrative reasons. But there may be financial reasons as well. For example, Bombay is a city, or Mumbai is a city where people have gone from different corners of the country, even different corners of the world, and settled down because it became a financial center of India. So these are all cosmopolitan cities. এখানে বিভিন্ন জায়গার লোক আসছে, and here you will find out amalgamation of different cultures, because people are interacting with each other coming from different parts of the world. And this is also to be understood as the secondary urbanization. বোঝা যাচ্ছে? So the primary urbanization is forming the orthogenetic cities by creating a great tradition which incorporated many little traditions through a process of universalization. বোঝাতে পারলাম আমি? This is how the orthogenetic or the primary urbanization happened. And the secondary urbanization is a process which is mostly post-industrial, when people have migrated, A, for administrative reason, example is New Delhi, B, for financial reason, the example is Bombay. বোঝাতে পারলাম আমি? And there are many such cities throughout the world, like Washington is another city where people have migrated because of financial reason. And nowadays we are also finding out different other kinds of cities, like built-in city, planned city, because industrial satellite townships, etc. এইগুলো আমাদের সিলেবাসে নেই. So we will be only studying on the orthogenetic or the primary form of urbanization, where great tradition worked and incorporated different little traditional elements to form a big city. And then we have this heterogenetic city where people have migrated and settled down because of financial or administrative reasons. So this is how we are going to study urbanization. I will be forwarding you the study material for more details. কিছু প্রশ্ন থাকলে করতে পারিস, or I will end up the call.
এটা আরবানাইজেশন এর আন্ডারে পড়লাম, তাই তো স্যার?
রাইট, আরবানাইজেশন দেখবে আরবানাইজেশন সিলেবাসের মধ্যে দেওয়া রয়েছে, প্রাইমারি আরবানাইজেশন এন্ড সেকেন্ডারি।
স্যার রবার্ট রেডফিল্ড,
হ্যাঁ বল
স্যার রবার্ট রেডফিল্ডের ওই যে আপনি একটা কি জায়গা বললেন নাকি,
চ্যাংকং,
না না স্যার ওই যে ভুলটার নাম
ইউক্যান্টন।
হ্যাঁ স্যার,
ইউক্যান্টন ইজ আ প্লেস ইন মেক্সিকো, গুগল করলেই পেয়ে যাবে।
ওখানেই উনি ওই ফিল্ড ওয়ার্কটা করেছিলেন।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ। Okay. So I'm ending the call, right? If you have more questions, we'll be discussing on the next class. আর হচ্ছে যে বইটা পড়, the book that I have given.